So, I mean, if you think about overtraining in the typical sense, again, that was originally done on the male model, right? So they're looking at high inflammation factors, high cortisol, poor recovery, low testosterone. And I really like to reframe the whole idea of overtraining and say it's low energy, because low energy state happens in men as well. People don't talk about it, but the aspects are very apparent to women when they lose their period and they start to put on belly fat. In men, it's low testosterone. And, guys aren't going to walk around going, hey, I've got low T. What do I do about it? Right?
My Muscle Project, welcome back to another episode. Today, we're basically podcasting across the ditch. Is that what they call it? Across the ditch? Yeah. But it's not with a local New Zealander. It's with someone from the States, Dr. Stacy Sims. Now, I'll give you guys a little bit of background, a little bit of information on how we cross paths. One of the members at the gym, she put me onto Stacy. She mentioned that she's a scientist herself, and she's like really into powerlifting and the science of training. And she was like, wow, I've like had a lot of health issues and stuff around sleep and other things. And she shed a lot of light on some of the issues. And it's really, really helped me with training and recovery. And I was like, okay, cool. Like lots of people do that. So what's the catch? Like, how is she different? Blah, blah, blah. And she's like, well, she focuses a lot more on women's health. And she brings to light a lot of things about research, which is probably the biggest thing that doesn't get as talked about, but it's getting talked about more and more these days is a lot of the research and training science and nutritional science that's applied to just gyms and athletes and clients and all that sort of stuff is done on men. It's done on middle-aged college men. So that's obviously a huge area of research that, it's good in some senses, but, obviously doesn't apply to a large percentage of the population. And I feel like, Stacey, you are doing a really good job of helping to shed some of that light and raise some of the concerns of the differences that we need to consider. Now, I guess where I want to start this is, why is it that a lot of the research is done on men, and how can, we going forward, how can we do more research to include the differences between men and women?
There's a bit of history in it too. Like you can't just say it's a whole biomedical aspect. If you look across history, women have been marginalized across the board in so many areas. And so when you started doing early biomedical research, they didn't even think about women. They're like, well, that's not even on our radar, so we'll just use men. So all the earlier studies and development of studies have been done on men. And then when you get into like specifically sports science research, it's really easy to get a population pool of 18 to 22-year-old college-age men. And then one of the excuses that really is not an excuse is they say, well, women have menstrual cycles and it's too difficult to study women because they have this perturbation of hormone across the month so that it'll change our result. So we'll just exclude them, or if we do include women, we'll just put them in the mix and we won't really disseminate out sex differences. The conversation is starting to change a little bit, and I think it's more from the globalization of sport and more high-profile women in sport who are asking, like, what about me? What about me? Seeing it across the board, really. Research is a little bit slower on the uptake, but it's starting to get there.
Yeah, you just brought up high-level sport. One thing that came out after the USA women's soccer team won the World Cup, they absolutely crushed everyone. The coach came out and said that he organized the individualized the training of each player around their menstrual cycles. Can you talk about like what advantages that would have for the individuals and like things that people like don't really consider about how much of an impact that would have?
Yeah, I was really excited to see that because the Fitter Woman app is one that's been in development, and it's been specifically developed for the athletic woman, not like ovulation type thing like Clue and all those others. So I was really excited to see that in press. And so when we think about the menstrual cycle, I really am pushing for women to understand that your period is an ergogenic aid. A lot of people are like, I don't want my period. I don't get my period. I'm training hard enough. But if you don't get your period, you're losing so much performance potential. For the fact that the sex hormones are very systemic, not just reproductive hormones. So estrogen by itself is a bit anabolic. Progesterone is catabolic. But when you're in that low hormone phase, when we go day 1 is the first day of bleeding, and you have up to around day 13, which is ovulation, that's when your body accesses carbohydrate really well, recovers really well. Central nervous system fatigue doesn't really come into play, so women feel like they have their mojo. They can hit it hard, recover hard, sleep well. Around ovulation, some women feel really bulletproof, and other women feel really flat. So if you're one of the women that feel bulletproof, you go and you hit that high top end training, because the idea behind training is to get that stress and recover from it. And that allows you to. And then as you start to get into what we call the luteal phase, or the higher hormone phase, this is where estrogen and progesterone exert their greatest effects that are different from men. So our core temperature goes up. We access more free fatty acids, so we can't really access carbohydrate in our liver and muscles. So it's hard to hit those intensities. Progesterone's catabolic, so we don't recover very well. Estrogen directly affects the same receptor site as tryptophan in the brain. So if you counter that with something like branched chain amino acid, you can get your central nervous system a little bit more set. But there's so many different things that come into play with training and recovery that if you just track your menstrual cycle against your training, you'll start to see a pattern over the course of 3 cycles. And then you'll know when you can really hit it hard and recover well, when you need to back it down a little bit and work more on technique, maybe a little bit more endurance. So instead of taking that typical 3 on, 1 off schematic that's been out there for so long that again was based on the male population, you can really dial it in to work with your physiology. And if you have an event or a key competition that occurs in the time where you feel a little bit flat, there are specific nutrition interventions you can do to boost your performance, so that you don't actually feel like you're going in compromised. Because I don't want anyone to ever say, oh, well, the few days before my period, I can't do anything. It's a bad time. Because it's not. It's understanding and then knowing what kind of interventions to put into place to get that power and that recovery back.
It must be challenging, because I guess it just means that you have to individualize a group program so much more. We take a sports team where everyone's like, okay, we're just going to all work hard for 3 weeks and then take a rest week. But it has to be like one step up in the individualization and the tracking. Sort
of. And I've heard that a lot, like, oh, it's in the too hard basket. But in sports teams, it's actually easier than like if you're an individual coach and you really do have to pay attention, you're training peaks and working on everybody. But if you're bringing a whole team into the gym for strength, right, and you're tracking, not everyone is going to be different days. Well, they might be, but you can have a group of low hormone and a group of high hormone. And if you're looking specifically at a team, there are different exercises and circuits and stuff that the team does based on positioning already, right? So instead of saying positioning, we're saying, okay, well, we know that this group of players are in that low hormone phase, so we can really hit that high intensity, do those broncos, do the extreme plyo, really work on that top end stuff. Well, these women that are in the high hormone phase, well, let's work more technique and higher rep, lower weight type stuff, so we don't overreach them, we don't get them injured. So we're really taking care of them. And then, you can layer it out that way, because when you're looking at strength training aspects, you already are mixing up the team. So instead of mixing it up according to player specificity on the field or who's poorer at what, you mix it up according to menstrual cycle.
And in the, I know it's obviously going to be different, but typically what of the different stages you mentioned, how long do they go for, each one?
So if we are talking like textbook specific, day 1 is the first day of bleeding, up to around day 13, which is ovulation. And then the high hormone phase is from day 14 to day 28 or 32. So each phase is around 2 weeks. And then we know in elite and high performing athletes that can get stretched out to 40 days, which is really important to keep track of. Because as you start to get fitter, you metabolize more estrogen. So you can start to have a flatlining of your hormones. If you lose your period, then we know that you're not eating enough to support what you're doing, and we get into this low energy state. And then the ramifications of that are so much more severe than dealing with, some of the negative cramping and aspects that you get with your period or having your period on event day. Because it's uncomfortable, but it's something that reminds you that you're healthy and you can deal with it, rather than getting into this amenorrheic state, which has so many negative implications on performance and health.
Yeah, I think that's probably something I want to get into, because we have crossed paths with and employed people that they've gotten to that stage, amenorrhea, is that how you say it? Yeah. So what, like, okay, firstly, what you mentioned, some nutritional interventions you could use to help yourself get out of it. Obviously, increasing calories is a big one. But, obviously getting there, you're kind of in this overtraining state. But what are like the typical early signs, obviously besides the bleeding stopping, but what are maybe some early signs that come on? And then how long are you going to be spending in this phase before you're doing some like almost irreversible damage, if that is ever a thing?
Yeah. So if we're talking about some of the critical studies that have come out, has looked at like increasing training load and not necessarily pulling back on calories. It just happens. Like you start increasing your training load and your appetite goes down. Mm-hmm. So you're not matching that. And over the course of 3 months of a training program, you'll see a significant decrease in performance over those 3 months. So everyone on the team is doing their same training. And those who are eating enough and maintaining their cycles in a regular pattern, their performance keeps going up. For those who are just on the cusp, dropping the low energy availability, start having some menstrual cycle dysfunction, it's down. So all that training is like against a brick wall. Some of the early signs are, you're dead in fatigue, you're not recovering well, you're starting to put on abdominal adiposity. And part of that is when you start getting into that stress state and cortisol comes up and you're not eating enough. Cortisol, we know, puts on belly fat, but your resting metabolic rate goes down. So that's one of the first things. After 4 days of low energy availability, you start to have some thyroid dysfunction, which is the first sign of downregulating your resting metabolic rate. And it's that whole conservation mode. So when you're thinking about that conservation mode, of course, you're not going to get your period because it's not advantageous to be able to reproduce if you can't even feed yourself. Right. So it becomes that biological aspect. And when you're thinking about it from a performance standpoint, I mean, I've worked with professional cyclists who are right on top of the game for about a year, and then the next season starts and they're off the back. And they're like, I don't understand what's happening. And you try to increase calorie load and they just can't get back on it until they go what we call all in. And that's backing the training down to maybe 10 hours a week or less. Intensity fully drops. You're really paying attention to what you're eating before and after training, because that timing becomes really specific to get out of that catabolic state. And it might take 3 to 6 months to get your periods back, but to get fully back into energy levels up, resting metabolic rate up. The longitudinal data is not there, but if you're looking, it can be from 2 to 6 years. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Not to get in that state.
Yeah. It's just like sounds like it's an amplifier on all the problems you already get from overtraining.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about overtraining in the typical sense, again, that was originally done on the male model, right? So they're looking at high inflammation factors, high cortisol, poor recovery, low testosterone. And I really like to reframe the whole idea of overtraining and say it's low energy, because low energy state happens in men as well. People don't talk about it, but the aspects are very apparent to women when they lose their period and they start to put on belly fat. In men, it's low testosterone. And, guys aren't going to walk around going, hey, I've got low T. What do I do about it? Right? But it is being very cognizant that you have to increase your calorie content when your training load goes up. And when we're in that, that body image awareness state and trying to lose body fat, one of the first things that people do when they start to put on belly fat is cut more calories.
Yeah.
But instead, they should be increasing their calories to lose it and maintain that health.
Yeah, and so with amenorrhea, is it typical to see it in certain types of sports that, I'm thinking some of the stuff you just said, like the high volume, high frequency sports, like endurance sports, does that show up more regularly there versus people that just kind of hit weights in the gym, or does it show up in high intensities sports like CrossFit, or where do you see it most?
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
We did a national survey of just recreational women exercising. 46% of them were in a low energy state. And of that 46, 32 already were amenorrheic and the rest had menstrual dysfunction. So it's prevalent everywhere. And this is why I think the undercurrent ramifications of people like, oh, I'm going to try keto, I'm going to try low carb, high fat, all of those things, because they're trying to say, well, I'm training hard, but I still have belly fat and I still feel flat. I still feel tired. Maybe it's what I'm eating. But then when you start adding that layer onto this early stress state, it increases and magnifies that stress. which again backlashes, and then the diet's not working, my training's not working. So, you need to really just pull it back, and it all comes down to let's keep track of what's going on with health. How do we do that? We keep track of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's girls listening to this right now, and they may be unsure if they're, because we're really good at adapting, right? We're really good at getting used to certain things, and you might say, no, I've got good energy, but you forget what it's like to have actual good energy. You get used to a low energy state, and you see it all the time with people that are sleep deprived, 5-6 hours sleep. Oh no, I'm good. I feel great. Yeah, I'm functioning fine, but they've forgotten what it feels like to be optimal. So what are some maybe like more tangible signs that you can be like, okay, you have outside of low energy, you have menstrual dysfunction? What are some of the signs there?
Aside from like your spotting or your actual period changes length, or like a lot of women will be like, okay, my first day is really heavy, then I might have a couple of light days, and then it dissipates, or there's a patterning of it. If that pattern changes, then you really need to pay attention. Before you even get to that point, if you're looking at, okay, I've trained hard and I still feel really flat and tired, I'm going to be taking 3 or 4 shots of espresso just to get moving, right?
Just to get out of bed.
Right? I'm crawling out of bed to get that coffee before I can even open my eyes, kind of thing. A lot of people say that's normal, but it's not, right?
Yeah, the blind coffee making. I'm not opening my eyes till this thing's ready.
First shot for the left eyelid.
Before, and you put it in the fridge, you have it while you're making coffee. Which is what I did when I was like really sleep deprived with a newborn. I was like, oh my God, I should need coffee before I can even do anything. But it really, those markers, like we get so used to being so stressed and so like sympathetically driven. And one of the things I get my athletes who are trying to recover is take 10 minutes in and activate parasympathetic. So it's like sitting down in a quiet space for 10 minutes and just really, it's not mindfulness, so to speak, but it is concentrating on breathing, deep breathing, and just relaxing everything, because nobody does that really, unless you're into the mindfulness, which is a small subset, but not very many people do it. And just being able to activate that parasympathetic and get that relax, it centers you enough to say, yeah, that fatigue is just to the floor.
Yeah, no, that stuff's really powerful. I mean, recently, Raf and myself, we've been using some activity trackers, which, we'll probably talk more about in a future date. But it's interesting because I'm just tracking kind of like my daily HRV and my daily resting heart rate. And my average resting heart rate over the day is like 59. But it's interesting because I'll be sitting there, say, doing a podcast right now, and the resting heart rate might be like 89 beats per minute. And I'm like, wow, it's really high. I'm like, I wonder how quickly I could drop that. And it's in less than 10 deep breaths, I can get it below 50, like not changing my position. And if you ask me, okay, what do you think your resting heart rate is right now? I'd be like, oh, maybe like 65, a little bit above resting, but it's way up there because you don't realize how easily you can just be sympathetically driven all day. And the problem with being sympathetically driven is sometimes it feels really good because you're just running off all this adrenaline. So you're like, yeah, I feel fresh. I feel awake. Like I feel ready to go. But you end up ultimately just crashing the system at a later date, right? You just wake up and you just can't get that energy back because you're just running off adrenaline the whole time. You have some interesting stuff about like a difference in the cool down between men and women. Can you explain that in detail?
Yeah, so we'll back it up to like the contrast bath and the ice baths, and right? And we see, oh, it doesn't work. And this is the epitome of like using the wrong population to look, because there are inherent sex differences post-exercise. So post-exercise, women vasodilate. So all their blood goes to the periphery because they're trying to offload heat. Because there's a little bit of a sex difference of sweating onset, how much heat can be lost through evaporative sweat. So there's that sex difference there. So you have this immediate vasodilation. All the blood goes to the periphery to offload a lot of heat quickly in women. In men, it's the opposite. They vasoconstrict, and they bring all the blood centrally to try to get more flushing, get more of that blood back to the central organs. So if you're thinking about contrast bath or ice baths afterwards, if you're already constricted, of course it's not going to work, right? Because the blood's already central. But for women, it works really well because they're so vasodilated and they have low blood pressure, which is why women after exercise get that orthostatic hypotension, head rush kind of feeling. They need to sit down. It's because all their blood is at the periphery. So you do some contrast bath or some cooling for women afterwards, boom, that constriction happens, goes back centrally, and it facilitates recovery. For men, it's maybe an hour later when things start to settle a bit more, where they can benefit from some cooling or contrast bath. But for women, it's right after exercise.
Interesting. So does that mean if you take out the contrast baths, is there anything that you should do like nutritionally to change post exercise, or would you? Is there still like a stretching protocol that would work for both people, or would one person not want to do a stretching protocol, or vice versa?
No, it comes down to drinking something really cold, like something as simple as your protein shake after exercise, right? If women drink it super cold, then that helps facilitate that vasoconstriction because it's the impulse of heat where your body's going to try to warm it up, right? So the blood will come centrally. And it's the same thing as during exercise, per cooling, where you're drinking or eating something cool to drop that core temperature. Now, for men, it can be lukewarm. Doesn't matter, right? Because you're not trying to bring that blood flow back. As for stretching and facilitated recovering, both really benefit from active recovery. But if you're looking to drop core temperature and get blood circulation back to quote normal, then women having something cold right after exercise intrinsically is going to help just as much as stepping into cool water.
And would that also be reflective of the differences, like at just a resting state where women they're the opposite. They have it seems like their feet and their hands are always cold. And then for men, their feet and their hands are always warm. Or is that just a myth?
It's not necessarily a myth because women, well, both sexes tend to regulate heat a lot through the palmar surfaces of their hands and feet. And women first response to thermoregulation is to vasoconstrict, vasodilate, where men first will start sweating and or, if they're cold, they'll start to constrict a little bit, but not as tightly. This is why Raynaud's is so apparent in women. It's an autoimmune disease that happens more in women. So it's not like a myth per se why women have colder hands and feet than men. It's just they're more sensitive for that blood flow circulation.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. It's almost like I feel like in really extreme conditions, both people have the same thing. Both their hands are freezing, their feet are freezing, but it's only that slight difference from the norm where it's like one person kind of has more of a reaction than the other. So that actually makes sense. Now I wanted to come back to the sort of the pro athlete thing. It was interesting hearing about the Team USA, like individualizing things for each athlete. But my next thought was, they still have to show up and play the game at the same time, and they're all going to be at different stages. So how would you managing, I guess, like the peaking or like the competing phase? Obviously, you can manage the training because you're not really on a strict schedule as much. You can be more flexible. But how would you manage, game day is Saturday. So how so this person could be in, a totally different part of the cycle to someone else. So how do you best manage for competing? Is there stuff that you do to prep for it, to peak at the right time?
So aside from like managing the training to actually stepwise increment to peak on game day, right? So
of course.
From the acute phase aspect in a week, say someone is at the tail end of their period, so they're coming in at the optimal phase to compete. And then you have someone who is a few days out from their period and they're like, oh, my plasma volume's down, my core temperature's up, I'm feeling fatigued. This is where those nutrition interventions come into play. So you want some protein before and after, or even just branched chain amino acids, because it's the leucine concentration that's circulating in the body. It's not for muscle protein synthesis. It's for that blood-brain barrier to counteract estrogen in the brain to kick back some of those receptor sites and allow some of that central nervous system fatigue to attenuate. So it's that leucine kicking into the brain to help mitigate some of that. And then we're thinking about, plasma volume and plasma volume expansion. You can use a hyperhydration or have miso soup the night before to bring in more sodium and fluid. Making sure you're staying hydrated with something with salt in the water, because we kick out a lot more sodium when progesterone's elevated. And basically when you're thinking about it, it's like, I'm going to be playing soccer or I'm going to be playing sevens and it's short, it's high intensity. I can't access carbohydrate very well. Well, I'll have some glucose tablets. So it's bringing blood sugar up without even interfering with digestion. It's like a quick hit of sugar. Once you get that carbohydrate, then your body can start to tap in and work in a metabolically more efficient way for that high intensity. So it's just looking at what has been mitigated because of estrogen, progesterone, and then what, from a nutrition standpoint, can we put into play. And then from a longer term scope, when you want to reset your cycles or shorten the duration of them, then you're looking at things like magnesium, because we lose a lot of magnesium in the high hormone phase for building up the uterine lining. Omega-3 fatty acids, because your period starts from an inflammation response. You don't want a huge inflammation response. And in the same vein, using like white willow bark or baby aspirin to again help attenuate some of that inflammation response.
Oh, wow. So if the plasma volume goes up, does that mean the blood is just moving slower through the body, not delivering as much oxygen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So you lose around 8% of the plasma volume in the high hormone phase just because of a redistribution of fluids.
Right.
So the idea of feeling bloated and trying to use a diuretic is a misnomer. You should actually be having more salt and water to push more of that fluid.
Right.
Yep.
Blood.
Interesting. Now, probably the big elephant in the room is like not all women are just having natural cycles because they're on birth control. So how does that play into effect with the prescriptions? Now, before we get into that, I wanted to know if you had the choice, if you've got the women's soccer team, and let's say they're, half's on birth control and half's not, are you going to, if you have enough time, say you have a year or whatever, or 2 years before the World Cup, when's the next World Cup? 4 years. So let's say you have 4 years now. Do you take them off birth control? Is that ideal? Would you have it as natural as possible, or do you keep it as it is and you just work with what you got?
Barring any health issues, that they need to be on some kind of contraception for like PCOS or endo, I would take them off. I would definitely take them off because as soon as you start to get some endocrine dysfunction that you need to do something about training nutrition. The other thing is we know that oral contraceptive pills increase systemic inflammation, decrease IGF-1, decrease muscle protein synthesis activity. And we also know, even out of Oz, Mia Schomburg, she's demonstrated that your high intensity interval training and your sprints, you don't adapt to them when you're on an OCP because the exogenous hormones have a different response within the body, and their primary effect is downregulating your natural hormones. So women are like, "Oh, I get my period because I'm on the pill." I'm like, "No, you don't get your period. You get a withdrawal bleed. A withdrawal bleed is completely different from a natural period." And I get frustrated when I see young athletes come in with their mom and they're like, "Oh, well, my GP wants me to go on a pill because I'm irregular." It's like, no, we need to look at what's going on from a training and a nutrition factor and try to boost overall calorie intake and modify training to get your periods to be normal. Because as soon as you go on a pill, we can't keep track. So if I was to have like a high performance female environment and want to get the best out of my athletes, I would have them naturally cycling and put their training according to their cycle, and then also be able to keep track of like inflammation factors, what might be happening from a perturbation standpoint of their periods. And you can modify body composition easier. You can increase lean mass easier. Because, you're working with physiology instead of against it.
Yeah. So it sounds like, I'm sure you got some probably strong opinions on this, but it sounds like the OCP is, well, that industry in particular is overprescribed. And it doesn't really seem like it has many benefits at all for just people that are naturally healthy. They maybe, I've got a skin condition, or I've got some, really bad period pain or whatever. And so, yeah, like you said, rather than go to the root cause, they hand out the OCP pretty easily. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that it seems like it's overprescribed for something that doesn't have a whole lot of benefits?
Yeah, I'm kind of laughing in my head at this conversation because I had the same conversation with my husband last night. I was reading a paper and they're saying that testosterone and progesterone increase muscle protein synthesis, but estradiol doesn't. And I was like, wait, this is counterintuitive because we know that estradiol is anabolic. And then it comes out that they were giving them exogenous hormones. I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense because the exogenous estradiol does not improve muscle protein synthesis or bone. So Steve's like, no, that's my husband, sorry.
Yeah, I figured. Made sense.
And he's like, oh, well, then how's it different from HRT? And I was like, well, now this is the thing. It's like, if you were to take a woman and put her on an OCP when she's 15, because she comes in, she's like, oh, my periods are irregular and I want to clear my skin up and I'm embarrassed. and the GP automatically puts her on an OCP, right? And so that becomes normalized. It's normal. Everyone's on an OCP. And then as she goes through adulthood, she might come off, have a baby, gets back on it because she doesn't want another kid, or she's having really heavy periods after being pregnant. And then she rolls into perimenopause and menopause and then wants to go on HRT. So if we look from a physiological and health standpoint, all the negative ramifications of that, of increased inflammation, decreased IGF-1, increased cardiometabolic issues that come from these exogenous hormones, are not beneficial to the woman's overall health. So we don't actually know how much better from a health profile she would be if she'd never taken it. We do know that if a young girl comes off them, there is a settling period of 6 to 8 months while her body naturally gets into it. And then all of a sudden she'll find she has more energy. Her body composition is easier to attain. She responds better to training. Running mechanics and everything become better. She can mitigate stress fractures. All of these things come into play. But the response really of putting someone on OCP comes from history. Because when it was first developed at Stanford, early days, it was like one of the first iconic stake of the flag of the women's liberation movement, because finally they have control over reproduction. And I was explaining this to my husband. I was like, I think it's very ironic that it was a bunch of male researchers who created this. And it wasn't necessarily to enhance a woman's freedom, but to me, and reading the literature and history of it all, it was another way of controlling the woman for the husband and for reproduction. But then it got switched in the mindset in media. And so now it's just very commonplace. Let's give someone a pill. They have these hormone disruptions that we know we can solve with a pill. But instead of, again, getting at the root of the problem, it's just so commonplace to be like, here you go, here you go, here you go. And there's so much money in pharmaceuticals that you're not going to have a doctor who's going to counter a pharmaceutical sales agent coming in because they might risk losing some funding.
And do you think that 6 to 8 month settling period you mentioned, is that part of the reason people don't realize? Because when they first go off it, they don't really get any performance boost. It's almost like maybe worse or it's no better.
Yeah,
it is. And they're like, well, I feel awful. I'm getting bloated. I'm getting side effects. And then my periods come and I can't keep track of it because it's all over the show. It's like, well, of course it's all over the show because you've been down-regulated and below baseline for so long. Your body's relearning how to release its own natural estrogen, progesterone, get an LH surge, be able to create the whole aspect of being reproductive and having babies, but at the same time, being able to allow your body to understand what these natural hormones are doing to all the other systems of the body. So it does take a settling process. It's kind of like, recovery from surgery. You might feel good 5 weeks down the line, but you're still not healed.
No, it's seriously concerning. How often are they like young women coming in with some kind of issue looking for the pill to be prescribed? Is it? I mean, it's overprescribed a lot, but are they just coming in with like really minor issues that just need something small adjusted at the root cause, or are these kind of major issues they're coming in with, or is it a bit of a mix that they're getting prescribed for? Yeah,
it's a bit of a mix. And if we're looking in the sporting environment, one of the biggest reasons girls drop out of sport is because the period starts. They go through puberty, and puberty in itself is something else that should be addressed. We need to teach our girls how to run, lift, all the techniques, because there's so many different angles and changes that happen. But I've had so many young swimmers and gymnasts come to me and say, do I need to stop sport now because my period has started? It's like, well, no, you don't. We just need to work with it. But that is a brave step to come to someone to say that. The first thing that happens is they go to their parents, or they're like, and so the mom's like, I don't know what to do. Let's bring you to a GP so we can control it. Your skin's starting to break out and you're concerned about your skin. Well, I know that going on the oral contraceptive pill is going to help with your skin. It'll help regulate the cycles. It'll help the bleeding. But we know that if a girl starts her period before the age of 13, it's going to be more regular and it's going to be lighter. If a girl starts her period after the age of 13, it's going to be very irregular for the first 5 years. And some days or some months it's going to be super heavy and some aren't. And that's the concern, because that isn't discussed either. So if a teenage girl is like, oh, I have really bad cramping and heavy bleeding and my face is breaking out, then the automatic response, go to the GP puts them on a pill.
Right. And would there be like, how would you intervene with stuff like that if they're having it post 13 and it's all over the place and they're getting breakouts and that sort of thing? Like, what are some of the typical interventions that you would use?
So looking really good at nutrition, right? So using some of the natural probiotic foods, right? Anti-inflammatory foods, using some adaptogens. So adaptogens are really powerful. So we're looking at maca, shashandra, ashwagandha. And if you start getting those into a regular habit, then it helps attenuate all that. So we know that by decreasing the cortisol and the stress response and also challenging the receptor sites of estrogen with adaptogens, then it just kind of downregulates everything and settles. And the more physically active a girl is, the more those hormones flatline and you get a less of those perturbations that happen. So over the course of 3 months of following, strict nutrition and being on par with it and using adaptogens and increasing some high intensity, you start to baseline those hormones and things start to settle.
Now, I did want to get to this. I don't know how into it we'll go, but you had some of your own experiences with being just a beast of an athlete, but also having some issues, some health issues as a result of it. Could you maybe give us a little bit of the stuff that you were into and the lessons that you've pulled out of it from your own experiences? Because I always feel like they're some of the most valuable from your own journey.
Oh my gosh, where do I start?
Just give us the highlight reel. Just ignore all the losses.
Gosh, so it started when I was around 13. I was in ballet, and I also started running, and my instructor told me I needed to choose between the two and recommended running because I was getting too big and tall and gangly to be a ballerina. And, that hits hard. So then I went through that whole teenage years of being amenorrheic and anorexic, right? And so the first time I went to a physician, he didn't do anything except want to put me on a pill, right? And I didn't want to take a pill. So that was my first foray of what the hell is going on. So then when I got to university and really started asking questions like what's going on, why is this happening, and taking some of the sports science classes and understanding what's going on, and then trying to help others, that was kind of like the foray into, okay, let's really look at what's going on. And then as I go through my academic career and my sporting career, it's like I was hyponatremic at Kona. And that was kind of the jumping part for my PhD, because coming from New Zealand with all the other Kiwis, and we'd all trained together and done all the heat acclimatization aspects. And then those of us who were in the high hormone phase had really difficult time with the heat and the humidity and became hyponatremic. And those in the low hormone phase were not phased at all. They had fine rice. So then that was like, what's going on? There's a difference here in the menstrual cycle. So that was, I got into my PhD looking at differences between the OCP and the low and high hormone phase, fluid balance, and nutrition to match. And then as, racing pro on the cycling circuit and seeing so many of these power to weight ratio and people worried about that, and eating practices existing on 1,100 calories a day, and trying to get people to understand you need to eat to perform. So that starts to get the interest into, okay, what is this low energy availability? Why are people losing their periods? Why is it taboo to say I have my period, but it's not taboo to say I don't have my period? So all of these came into play. And I think the biggest cornerstone for me was when I got pregnant and had my kid. I had a really hard pregnancy and lost a lot of weight. And then afterwards, just had a really difficult time coming out of it. And that's not talked about either. I ended up with a hip replacement from a torn hip labrum. I couldn't put weight back on because of the stress of having a newborn and not being able to eat a lot and still wanting to be an athlete, and just all these injuries that kept coming up. And now as I talk to women who are pregnant or just had their kid, it's very common. People don't talk about it either. How do you recover from pregnancy? Because that's the same as a major surgical event, but no one talks about it. How do you get your hormones back to being stable? How do you get that LH surge? How do you get out of that low energy state after you've had a kid? So those are all the high points of what I've learned and what's driven my academic career, from hydration issues and Kona into low energy states across the board, from being a professional athlete and working with professional athletes and getting people out of that red S state to female athletes after pregnancy who are in an energy state and just can't not get out of that stress state to be able to take care of themselves and their kid and get back into their athletic career.
Right. Why do you think, you mentioned a few times, people don't want to talk about it. What is it? What did you experience personally that you feel like were the reasons that women in these different environments didn't want to talk about these things?
It's male dominated, really. I mean, like I'll walk into a room now and I think that the hardest one that I had was walking into a conference with the New Zealand Rugby Union, and I'm surrounded by all these old white men, and I'm like, okay, how many people can say the word period? No one could say it, right? And I'm like, this is 2019 and we can't even say the word period, and you guys are coaching women. So there's an issue there. And if your coaches can't talk about it, then you already know it's not something that people are going to talk about even amongst themselves. And we've done surveys and we've done research, and part of it is a cultural aspect of like, what does it mean within your culture? And then also in the sporting context, a lot of women think that when they don't get their period, they're training hard and they're going to perform well. So that's why people don't want to say they have their period, because then it reflects back, I'm not training hard enough. So we're trying to change that conversation where I'm training hard and I'm getting my period and I'm performing better.
Yeah, it's a culture. It's like a small piece of bad information that becomes like a major thing in the sporting culture. That stuff happens all the time. It happens with, most often you see it with just high volume. You just see it with the best athletes in the world. They go, I wake up at 4 a.m. every day and I'm 2 hours early to practice or whatever. And they just create these mythological alter egos that everyone chases, and it ends up damaging the vast majority of the people participating in that sport or up and coming in that sport. Like I remember when we started in the sport of fitness in CrossFit, like Rich Froning. You watch him, I do 8 hours a day of training or whatever. And then that was the next thing. You had a whole population. You had potentially at this point hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people wanting to be CrossFit athletes, listening to this one guy go, you have to train all day, every single day. And, you saw what happened next. Like we lost more discs.
We lost a generation.
More discs and more shoulder labrums than we had in 2 years than we had in like the last century. So, I mean, these are the things that, once they become a part of the culture of, these sports, it's very hard to undo. But it's good that we're on that path. Now, we did kind of touch on it, but there's a few different diets that are particularly popular at the moment. I don't believe there's anything particularly wrong with these diets, but obviously you just have to make sure that the application is right for the individual, and they kind of understand everything. The two major ones going around right now for at least I feel like is in our space is vegan and keto. Now, how would they apply differently, if at all, to women throughout their cycle? Like, is it, okay, it's bad to be in ketosis at this point in the cycle, but, in this point, it's better to, you can be more ketogenic, or, maybe you do need more meats during times when you're bleeding, like maybe you need more iron from the meat, that sort of thing. How do these major diets apply to different times in the cycle, if at all?
Yeah, so I really try to dissuade women from being in ketosis or getting into the whole aspect of the ketogenic diet. And this comes down that women need more carbohydrate just for brain function than men. And if we take it back to like the typical male hunter-gatherer days, all the way back, in times of low calorie and low carbohydrate, right? Men lean up and get fit and they get fat so they can go out, fight the beast, bring calories home. The women of the tribe, they were not part of that. They were to stay home, take care of the kids, and not reproduce, because you don't want more mouths to feed. So under low carbohydrate intake and often low calorie intake, because of the high fat, you get greater satiation. So you get into a little bit of that low energy state. You put on more belly fat, you get endocrine function. And then the long-term data that's coming out now is a lot of cardiometabolic issues, even if you are an athlete. And then when we look at gut function as well, there is sex differences with the gut microbiome. And we know that in women who are more ketotic, you start to grow more of those firmicutes, which increases chronic fatigue, increases the body's ability to extract nutrients. So again, it promotes weight gain instead of weight loss. If people are like diehard, no, I really want to try this, you have to look at where your training is. And are you just going to be doing a lot of low aerobic stuff, endurance stuff? Then you can probably tailor it in. But for the most part, as a weight loss aid or trying to feel better and have clarity, one, the research doesn't support that so much. And then if we look at the original population where this research came from, it was from the clinical obese population, male, who need to lose weight quickly for surgery, and children with epilepsy. Because being in a ketotic state for children with epilepsy helps control it without medication. But this is a prime example of media pushing something from one population across the board to the fitness, and one person takes it and rolls with it. So then everyone else thinks it is. As for veganism or plant-based, I am a hippie at heart because I grew up in San Francisco. So I might be a bit swayed, but when I look from the environmental standpoint that's coming up, which is promoting all the plant-based stuff, right? So that's a good movement, but we have to be very cognizant that we are getting enough protein and we are getting enough energy. Because when you start having a pure plant-based diet, you increase the amount of fiber, which can increase satiation. You get really fantastic gut microbiome. And if you're paying attention to having some vegan branched chain amino acids or adding that to your plant-based protein shake, then you're pretty much on par. It's fine. But there's a lot of stopgaps now in the plant-based stuff, like the tofurkeys and the meat substitutes and all of those things that are coming out. As part of the whole vegan and plant-based movement, they are engineered nutrition and they're highly processed, and that's counterintuitive to gut health and performance. So it's that fine line. What is what? I always go inherently when you look, you want a little bit of an eye to the Mediterranean diet where you're not eating meat every day. And that's good for the environment. It's also good for your health, but you do want to have some lean protein across the board. And in full disclosure, I've been vegan since I was 14. Oh. And I'm
still alive.
I'm still alive. I've raced professionally, all that kind of stuff, but it's been incredibly difficult through the years. So to see the plant-based movement happen, I'm like, that's great, but there's still a lot of missteps. And so counseling people how to become plant-based and what you should be doing is becoming more and more common. But in my professional opinion, looking at highly trained athletes who are trying to reach that maximum performance, it really depends on training load, individual, and somewhat genetics. But yeah, we'll see as that longitudinal research starts to come out what the implications are.
And your concerns with the keto diet you mentioned at the beginning, do they kind of translate also into intermittent fasting protocols that guys tend to do a bit better with all the different types of fasting?
Yes, exactly. And part of the issue with the intermittent fasting research is they haven't included exercise. And we know that when you start doing exercise in itself, it's a fasting state, right? Because you're depleting everything and your metabolism is going up and you get into a bit of autophage. And it changes telomere length. So all the longitudinal data of exercise is very similar to what the longitudinal data is on intermittent fasting in that clinical or non-athletic population, right? But the two haven't been combined. We don't know what the implication is of intermittent fasting and exercise. What we do know is that when you go as a woman into exercise in a fasted state, you increase cortisol, and that's the first step to that too much stress that's going to start pulling estrogen and progesterone over and cause some endocrine dysfunction. So if you're looking to lose weight, it's you fuel for your training, and then you look at the rest of the day, and you can modify what you're doing the rest of the day just as long as the fuel for your training is set.
Makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's some really good stuff. Well, I've had a lot of questions answered today, but as with all great conversations, more questions have arisen, but potentially for another podcast. Stacy, we'll jump into our final 4 questions. Now, I assume you were sent these ahead of time, so you have probably done some preparation for them. Now, right before I do, I wanted to mention that you actually have a genetics company you mentioned to us at the start. Can you tell us the interest of where that came about and exactly what this company does? Because we've done some genetic testing as well. It's something that we're interested in, and I think it has a lot of application and great research that will happen now and in the future. So can you just tell us a bit about that company?
So I'll start with the interest really is epigenetics, right? So being a nutrition scientist and looking at how you can use nutrition to mitigate a lot of things, and then having the aspect of all these like 23andMe and stuff coming out, going, well, if you have the ACTN3, then you can't be a good endurance athlete. And it's like, but if you train for it and eat for it, you can under and overexpress. But if you bring it right back down to what it means to be healthy, and you look at reference ranges, right? And you get a blood test and you have reference ranges, and you might sit on the low end of testosterone, and your doctor will say, oh, well, you're normal. You don't need any help. And you're always still feeling flat and tired. And it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female, because women have testosterone as well. So you're feeling flat and you're tired and you're the low end of the range. And to them, you're normal, but for your body, you're not. So what this company is doing is taking the genetic aspect and looking at what are your genes, what does your body require, what is overexpressed, what is underexpressed, and then trying to get you to that 70th percentile of that reference range and seeing how your body responds. Because once you get to that 70th percentile, that might be where you need to set. But when we talk about reference ranges, again, it's population specific, and those reference ranges have come from many, many years of just taking blood from sedentary individuals and then applying it across the board. So it's not about changing your nutrition and your training to become super athlete. It's about, let's see what is normal for your body to maximize the nutrient density that you are taking from your food. Maybe we need to supplement, and maybe we don't.
Right.
That's super interesting. And what is the company that?
Integrated Genetic Solution.
Nice. And you guys are running testing at the moment? Awesome. Might have to connect with you on that. So first question, Stacy, is what is, if you had an opportunity to interview anyone that's alive today, who would you choose, and why, assuming that everything that you ask them, they would answer completely honestly?
And so being an expat in New Zealand and watching the current political climate, I would really like to sit down with Michelle and Barack Obama.
Okay.
And there's two reasons. One, because they fought the system so much to get where they were. And it seems like everything that they did, both Michelle fighting as a Black woman, coming up through that male-dominated law and how she's been able to push through it and become such a figure. And then Barack with everything that's happened with having the name Barack as an American, just trying to understand how they felt as they were getting through it all, and now how they feel seeing all this stuff being undone by someone like Trump.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, obviously, what's happening, but I do actually have some recent hope. If people are familiar with Joe Rogan's podcast, which I'd say pretty much everyone listening to this does know, he just interviewed Bernie Sanders, who, if people don't know, he is obviously like one of the major contestants to Trump. And I mean, we all know politicians are liars, but look, if he was telling the truth the whole time, is probably one of the best and most excited I've ever been to see, someone that could potentially be leader of the free world, as the American president is normally touted. If this guy gets into power, a lot of things will change for the better. Like he's got great stuff on like climate change. He's got absolutely he just dismantles Trump in just such a just a beautiful way, which is fantastic. And he's just got really good stuff on gun control, and he's just like really reasonable with everything he says, but it seems like he's addressing all the major issues, like, healthcare, minimum wage, gun control, and all this stuff that, Americans really need to consider as like major concerns. And obviously like fixing all the tax breaks that's occurred. And he's like, why does Trump have all these people in his, what's called in the Senate, in his Senate that are all billionaires, all business and billionaires. And he's like trying to help the American people, but he's helping the 1%. And it's just like giving them major tax breaks and stuff. And Bernie wants to bring in like heaps of tax laws for traders and the financial sector and all the crooks on Wall Street. So it's really good. I'd recommend anyone goes listen to it now. It's available. It's like, I think it's up to about 5 million views on YouTube. And it's probably doing like 10 times that on the audio version. So hopefully it reaches the right people. But it's just some of the stuff he says, you just think, man, this guy has got a target on his back. He must have so much security right now. he's turning against the most powerful people in America, right? He's in a vulnerable position, put it that way. But if he comes into power, obviously a lot of good things will change if he's able to change them. And then the best part at the end was Joe Rogan asked him about aliens. He goes, "Look, if you find out anything about the aliens," he's like, "Promise me now." He's like, "Tell me that you will tell us." He's like, "All right, if I find anything out, I don't know anything right now, I'll let you know."
That is so good.
So hopefully
that would be my question as well, bro.
Yeah, tell it.
The
Area
truth.
51. Yeah, is it real? Nice. That was a good answer. We haven't had Barack and Michelle as an answer on that before.
Sneakily got 2 in as well, which is smart.
I've had Donald Trump a lot, so that's good. That's good.
Yeah, I think that I would probably end up in jail if I was in the room with Trump.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way, including us. So second question is, what is something that you strive to do every single day that you feel like is essential to the success of your day, or just having like a really fulfilling day?
Having at least an hour to work out. I'm like a dog. I need to be outside every day playing. If I don't get it, not a good mom, not a good academic, not a good wife, not a good person. It's just something I need.
And what do you like to do? What are your go-to training styles these days?
Oh, well, I'm limited at the moment because I am recovering from surgery. So if we take that out of the equation, I dabble in CrossFit because it's fun and I don't have to teach it. I love cycling, road, mountain, that kind of stuff, and ocean swimming.
Oh, nice.
It's awesome because it's quiet and it's beautiful.
Yeah, ocean swimming, there's just something about it that's like kind of scary. So it like keeps you on high alert the whole time.
Extremely scary.
But it's also like really calming at the same time. Yeah.
Well, if you're in Australia, it's very nerve-wracking.
You can just be not scared with ocean swimming at all, and then you just think about sharks for like 5 seconds, and you are petrified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Petrified. Like, you're like, I'm not scared. You just think about it like, oh my God, where's the shore?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not here.
Yeah. It's a full on. Awesome. And so third question, what is something recently, Stacey, that you held as a strong belief but have changed your mind on?
You know, I struggled with trying to figure out this question because I grew up in an environment where what you thought you try to pursue, and if it doesn't come across as being viable, then you look for alternatives, and that's how I've lived my life. So I've always had strong views, and then if there's enough data or opinions or something to change it, then like I've changed views across the board. But the one that's held strong is the women are not small men because it's an inherent passion. Yeah, sorry. I couldn't find something that was really viable just because of my upbringing.
No, that's good. Any natural scientist will be always open-minded and feel like nothing is always set in stone. Yeah, it's just funny because like you just you live in the era where it's like, all right, we're so certain that this is the thing. You know, we've studied it, we've got the research, blah, blah, blah. And then you just imagine the people 15, 20 years from now will look back on us and they'll be like, oh, they were so wrong. They were so wrong. So it's just like everything changes, you know?
Exactly.
Cool. And final thing, do you have like a book that you'd recommend for people or a quote as well that sticks with you?
Well, a book, of course, my own, right? I recommend them. And then from like an enlightenment standpoint, I've always loved Siddhartha. You know, because it speaks to so many different things, whether you're trying to navigate the whole question now in the political environment or you're trying to find answers for yourself. People always take something different away, whatever mindset you're in. And then for quotes, the tagline really, because it resonates so well with people. And when you say it, people take a double step back and go, oh yeah, women are not small. So what is it? It's opened the door for conversation.
So what was Siddhartha? You mentioned
Siddhartha by Herman Hesse.
Oh, okay. No, I don't know it.
You read that?
No.
Oh, you have to read it.
Okay.
It's about some people say it is the history of the Buddha, but it's more about a man finding his way and being enlightened through different experiences and through different stories and different encounters with different people. And that's how I tell my daughter to live her life. You go, you meet people, you have different experiences, and that's how you learn. It's not rote learning in the classroom. The way we learn and become is by experiencing.
She's probably like, hallelujah, skipping this homework, going to see friends. Preach.
It was funny yesterday, though. I went to a Gary Vee event. I'm sure you're familiar with Gary Vee, and obviously he's very straight to the point, and he doesn't pull any punches. And it was the Q&A part in front of 6,000 people, and a 16-year-old boy stood up on the microphone, and he asked a question about entrepreneurship and school. And he's like, Gary, I'm in school, but I really want to be an entrepreneur, and I feel like every time I go to school and I sit in the classroom and I hear the teachers, I'm just not interested and not passionate about anything, and I want to, start making a difference in the world or whatever. And so Gary had some follow-up questions, challenged him on a few things. This is a back and forth in front of 6,000 people, a live audience. And then he says, my main thing is I've got this Instagram and I've got 80,000 followers and I post a lot of music and I share a lot of stuff on there. And Gary's like, oh, okay, cool. But do you make any money? Are you good at selling anything? And he goes, yeah, I do pretty well. He goes, how much money you made? He goes, I did $4,000 in the last 3 months. And he goes, oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, quit school. And the whole audience just laughed because it's kind of funny. It is kind of at this point now where he's like, look, if it's right for this person, school's not right for that person. But, it was taboo to say that in the past, to be like, no, university is not for you. But, it is right for some people and then for other people, it's not. So it was just funny. But no, that's some good stuff. So Stacey, we talked at the start, where is the best place for people to find out more information about you and follow you?
Facebook and Insta on Dr. Stacy Sims.
Nice.
That's the easiest way. Update every day. Something new, a new snippet comes out every day. And then if you want more information personally, then you can get a hold of me through those sites too.
Awesome.
And is the book on Amazon?
Yep, it is. It's on Amazon, and I found it on a whole bunch of different places, but the easiest is Amazon.
Nice. Cool. And Stacey is Stacy?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Not CEY. CY. Cool. Stacey, well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Very, very different conversation for us, but hopefully a lot of value for the listeners. But yeah, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Stace.